All right, it's 9 minutes after 10 o'clock. We said we have a full plate this morning, and the plate will continue to feed you on this brunch morning. And I've got a gentleman here who is not exactly looking like a chef because his mood is not that of a chef. And if he's a chef and he's got the mood he's got, I don't want his food. He is Jerry. He is Joseph Remy. He's the Secretary General of the Communication Workers Union. As you know, they are currently involved in a situation where TSTT just purchased for $255 million the media aspect, the communications aspect of Massy's, which is Massy's Communications. I want to get into that in a moment, but first of all, Mr. Remy, let me say welcome and good morning. Thank you for coming down.
Hi, good morning to you, Rennie. Good morning to your listeners and your followers on the E.
It is good to see you. To be clear and for full disclosure, your union represents the workers of TSTT. There are protests currently going on for 2 pension payments and a large sum of money owed to retirees that came from the previous merger in 1991 between Trinidad and Tobago Telephone Company, Telco, and TSTT. Explain that first before our listeners go deeper, please.
Okay. In 1991, the companies merged. There was the telephone company and there would have been Textel. Textel was the external leg of communication and telephone company was internal. And when the both of them carried pension plans with them, and when the companies merged, they formed TSTT. And TSTT created a new pension fund plan. And the telephone company pension fund plan, the contribution that the members were making was 6.5% of their basic salary, as against the Textel pension fund plan where the members were making 5% of their basic salary. And this situation ran for some years into the merged entity. And we made approaches to the company to have that situation rectified because there was a level of inequity, because the benefits would have been basically the same, but the contributions would have been different. Eventually, the pension fund management committee agreed in principle that there was a disparity and they reduced the contribution of the former telephone companies members to 5%. And the claim now is that one extra 1.5% that was paid for 11 years by the former telephone company workers has to be reimbursed. And that is a big issue that we have with the company right now.
All right. I just wanted to make our listeners clear that you don't come exactly with no weight. Today is already weight there from the CWU. Having cleared that, it is safe to say from reports I have heard you make, you are livid currently by the Massy Communications buyout by TSTT and also the discussion about layoffs. Let us start with the layoff area. TSTT Chairman Imal Elias said before the Public Accounts and Enterprises Committee that jobs will come in for cutting in the future. You are saying that even though his justification is that several technological improvements necessitate that, this should not be the case. Explain.
Okay, and again, I have the firm belief that the chairman was very presumptuous, disingenuous, and maybe trying scare tactics against TSTT employees.
Now, why don't we try fast and out of place? I think
Well,
that's what you said.
that has already been posted on the media. So if you want me to repeat it, I will
Fast
say that
and out of
Mr.
place,
Elias was fast and out of place to make that statement. And let me say why. We came through an environment, and like I said again, I have been in the company since 1977. The company started off with electromechanical equipment, and as the technology evolved, the means of communication changed. But that did not warrant the retrenchment or the job loss that Mr. Elias is talking about. What that necessitated was a change in skill set and retraining and retooling of the employees to fit into different areas of the company's operation or to move with the advanced technological development of the company. And as such, we worked that thing through, and the company continued, and it worked profitably for the company over the years. And we accept the fact that technology will change because we're in a technologically driven environment and industry, and as such, as technology evolves, the way how you do work will change. But that does not mean that that is mass retrenchment as what Mr. Elias is advocating. We sat with the company about early this year and came up with a memorandum of agreement on the whole issue of the fiber deployment, which would change the way our work is done. And the CEO agreed with us. We signed that MOA, which said that we will look at retraining. We talk about opening back the training school in the company and training people to do work differently in the organization because we accept the fact that the technology will change the way our work is done. So for Mr. Elias to jump out now and talk about this issue about where there used to be 5 people, there will be 0. He does not know, it's like cockroach playing in foul business.
And there are
That's
two
the
areas
wrong-
of this
that's
that
right.
I don't understand equally, and maybe you can enlighten me and our listeners this morning. If, in fact, TSTT has purchased Massy Communications and all, Tutbagai, all the employees and everything else, then why are you bringing in employees when you see the technology evolving that necessitate the retrenchment of certain people? Explain that to me.
Well, I wish I was in a position to give a proper explanation backed by data and facts, Rennie, because up to now, we have been left in the dark about this acquisition. What we heard and what we saw is all what Mr. Elias said before the Public Accounts Committee and at their media statement. And the company thereafter sent a letter to us the afternoon after the press release indicating about this acquisition, but they never give us details of the acquisition. So what we are hearing now is that is a share purchase agreement, which means that they only bought off 100% of the shares. But inside of the discourse, Mr. Elias is saying they have access to Massy's fiber plant, which means that there's more than a share purchase. There are other arrangements inside of that.
Go back slowly for me, just that we all followed it because I missed it. You say what we are hearing now is that it was only a share purchase
agreement. They bought off 100% of Massy Communication. And that the companies, what we want to know is, would Massy continue to operate as Massy?
As Massy Communications.
As Massy Communications. Would TSTT continue to operate as TSTT? And would TSTT have any control over Massy employees, over Massy's physical assets, over Massy's plant, over Massy's equipment? Those are the things that nobody knew because they have not been revealed to the public as yet.
The Secretary General of the Communications Workers Union, Joseph Remy, is my guest here. And here comes the question. We don't have details of this. Even the Minister of Finance is waiting as corporation sold to get information on this, which is amazing in itself. However, is there any suspicion, because I thought I heard this uttered, and I am not too clear as to the source, but it is in the public arena, as to whether Massy's, the fact that we purchased TSTT, purchased $255 million of all of Massy's communication, is this going to be that the payment will in fact be shares in TSTT, and if so, what is the suspicion from your union?
Okay, well, where we sit and what we are very clear on and what we know with 100% certainty is that the parent company of Massy Communication, which is the Massy Group of companies, has indicated a deep interest in purchasing the 49% shareholding of TSTT. And also, not just the purchase of the 49% shareholding, but having control, management control, and maybe get majority shareholding in TSTT. So we knew that. So once we knew that, and we now seeing TSTT has entered into some arrangement to buy Massy Communication, our suspicion is that this is just a holding kind of situation where they will now have synergies across the both companies, and it will make it much easier for Massy Group of Company to come around and buy the 49% shareholder and now have majority, have management control, and thereafter make a pitch for the ownership of TSTT. This is something that we would hope somebody clarifies and give us a clear direction on. And that is the concern we are having. It is pointing in that direction, and there are evidence in the corporate industries of similar situations. Liberty Global right now owns what Cable and Wireless had. But the genesis of that is that Cable and Wireless bought out Columbus Communication, which is the owner of Flow. But the Columbus Communication was majority owned by one John Malone, right? John Malone ended up being bought out by Cable and Wireless, but ended up as the majority shareholder of Cable and Wireless. And now his Liberty Global has now bought Cable and Wireless. So the company that was bought ended up in control of the company that bought them. And it's a similar thing that we are seeing developing in this situation here. So TSTT by Massy Communication, the parent company is sitting there and waiting. And to me, it is laying the foundation for them to have total control at the top, because there were some signals that were sent early on.
If that suspicion is in any way true, we are looking at what can be described as the biggest transfer of state assets.
That's right.
That's right. And that would be frightening. It would be good to hear what comes out from the Minister of Finance after he gets the details that he requested.
Definitely.
If you're joining us this morning, 19 minutes after 10 o'clock, you're inside Brunch. Joseph Remy, Secretary General of the Communication Workers Union, is my guest. There is a question raised, however, by Mr. Elias, or a representative talking before the Public Enterprise Committee. And the question was, the wage cost, the cost of wage to revenue of TSTT, they say, is way out of proportions. It costs almost 2.5 times to keep a TSTT employed as against industry standard. I know you took umbrage to that because you said they were speaking out of, I shan't go there, but you said they were speaking without a foundation.
Definitely. And let me say, Rennie, this is not the first time the company is throwing that in our faces. When we had the prolonged negotiation for the period 2003-2007, we ended up before the industrial court. The company had a detailed presentation. They brought in a company called Seismic Consultancy, which did wage surveys over the entire Caribbean and brought data, and they were trying to use that in the court. And our union made representation to the court, debunking that information, and the court eventually awarded a 10% wage increase on the basis of that. So the argument they're coming with is the same argument again.
Let me just be sure I'm really clear. So you're saying the argument that what is paid a TSTT employee right now, where it is claimed it's way out of proportion with like competitors, is inaccurate. Is what
that's right. And they brought in companies from Panama and those other areas, and we brought our information from similar structured telecommunications entities. And when we throw the data out, so we are saying you want to make comparisons, you can't use a straight line situation. So a technician in the United States that earns $4,000 US a month, you're making a comparison with a technician in Trinidad and Tobago who is earning less than $10,000 a month. 10,000 TT as compared to 4,000 US. Those are the comparisons that the company attempted to make. And when we presented the data, that is why the company's argument was debunked, because they can't say it's dollar for dollar, because we have to use the exchange rate in the situation. And we were saying that if one of our technicians leave here and go to the United States to work, they will start at a salary at minimum $3,000 US a month. Make that comparison to Trinidad and Tobago for similar type of work, because we are not an entity that just does one type of service outlay. TSTT is one of the most unique telecommunication providers. There's 5 players we have, 5 different service offerings that the company has. And the skill set of the technicians that are required is far different to what is required in some other industries.
And you hold the capacity as the backbone of the telecommunications.
Definitely. That's what drives the company.
Do you concede, however, or would you concede? Well, let me go to your statement. You said we expect that there would be some dislocation with technological changes, and you conceded that there may be layoffs from time to time. But you made a very important point a moment ago.
Let me correct you. I didn't say layoff. I said redeployment. Or retraining.
On retraining and redeployment, which is exactly where I want to go to.
That's right.
You said that in your discussion, in your wage negotiation, that came up, the whole question of reopening the training schools.
That's right.
What has happened to that?
Absolutely nothing at this time, Rennie. We have not had any move to have that training school reopened. They have not even acquired a building as yet. And that is a fundamental flaw in the company's operation. And what we are seeing they're using is some buildings like somebody's house in Chagonas, the company is using for training. Totally inadequate health and safety issues are ripe in those environments. And all we are saying to the company is that in a competitive environment, we're supposed to have well-trained, well-equipped and competent personnel to carry out the company's operation. A training school, they should have never closed down the training school in the first instance.
What was the justification for closing it?
Nobody has a clue. The first thing is that where they positioned the training school, the geographical location was totally mad. They placed a training school in Chagaramas, and we have people distributed throughout the geographical spread of Trinidad and Tobago. So people coming from south to get to Chagaramas in the morning to do training would have been very tedious. And in those circumstances, they felt that the training school wasn't serving the purpose. All they had to do was to relocate the training school and not close it down. But some wise EVP HR at that time felt that it would have made more sense to do outsourced training. And that threw the whole company totally out of sync. And then subsequent to that, the company went on a crazy voluntary separation drive and allowed about 300 or 400 of its most skilled and trained personnel to leave. We were clear at that time that they were setting up the company to fail, and somebody was preparing TSTT as like a lamb to the slaughter. And that's how
You
we
have
saw it.
just said, you have just echoed the same words of the chairman of the of TSTT right now, Mr. Elias. He said it is clear to him. He said, if my recall is correct, I know who you are. You know, I know who you are, and in time it will come out that TSTT was being set up between I think it's 2014 and 15 to be so run down that it will be sold. Now, if that is the case, and you seem to concur with that, if that is the case, then explain now why, according to your suspicion, that TSTT is being set up under his tenure for someone else to take
Well,
over.
you just hit the thing there for someone else. So the first set of people were setting up for one set of persons. He's now setting up for a different set of persons. Everybody's grabbing at TSTT because TSTT is positioned. It's positioned in a place to be very lucrative. And we have been articulating to the company, I heard Mr. Elias say, we have saying to the company years now, one, we were the ones who fought that, you know. We were the ones who fought Telecom Authority for the 700 megahertz spectrum. We were the ones who protested outside the hotel when they brought all the regulators to the region together, the owners of Digicel. We were in their faces challenging them, saying that they were running down TSTT. We were the ones who challenged when Cable and Wireless was not allowed to demit TSTT as soon as the acquisition of Columbus took place. Now we are hearing Mr. Elias blowing his trumpet and saying that ex-Cable and Wireless can come back. But we were the ones, Cable and Wireless came to us and attempted for us to go to the government and solicit to get additional shareholding. We said, not this Communication Workers Union. We have fought too long and hard to bring TSTT to a point where nationals could have a stake in the telecommunication sector, and we are not going to allow that to go. You could remember the strike in the 1960s. It was the longest strike ever in the history of Trinidad and Tobago to move the telephone company and the industry from foreign hands to local hands. And that is how telco was formed. Are we going to turn that on its head? Dr. Williams will be turning in his grave if that happens. And we cannot, as progressive trade union persons, we can't sit idly by and allow that to happen. So the signs are clear.
It is 26 minutes after 6 o'clock, 26 minutes after 10 o'clock. Joseph Remy is with me. I am actually, my head is locked in to something that you mentioned that's really important, which is the 700 mega cable, that whole spectrum.
That's
Our
right.
listeners may not be clear on that. Take your time as best as you can make it clear to the layman. Why is that 700 meg spectrum so important? Why was it so important? And why was it refused to TSTT initially?
Okay, at the lower frequency level, it is much more powerful. And data now is the trust for the telecommunication industry. And okay, sometimes you come into a building, and when you're inside, maybe a dense concrete building, you find it's difficult to get signals because TSTT is running at what they call the 1900 frequency spectrum. But when you go lower down the frequency thing, it's more powerful. It allows you to penetrate much more, and it allows you to use less capital because the equipment requirement is much less. What TSTT had to do is do a roundabout on the 1900 megahertz spectrum and deploy more physical resources, which cost them more money. So if you don't give them the 700 megahertz spectrum, the competitors would have a distinct advantage in the sense that they would have to have less capital deployment and have more penetration, more power, and that will roll out the LTE, long-term evolution, which is really where 4G is driven, and which is where data is supposed to be, is going now. And that is the critical issue, you know, and TSTT was denied that for years. We have been championing that since about 6 or 7 years now. We have been saying, protesting on the road, that somebody is setting up TSTT, and we accused the last start board. And you know, it was ironic when Mr. Elias said something that he find we were disrespectful when we had a bobole of the CEO. But we went in front of that and put a bobole of the then chairman and the CEO because we felt that they were the ones who would betray Trinidad and Tobago by denying TSTT those spectrum. And in this circumstance, we said the same thing with the CEO. It's nothing personal with the CEO, but if you do something that we don't believe is in our best interest, then we believe it's our right to demonstrate that publicly, and we did nothing illegally. So I find it was very thin skin of Mr. Elias to put a picture of a bobole being beaten and talk about disrespect. That is part of Trinidad culture.
You made a very good point earlier, because many have said TSTT should be a cash cow, but it has not been bringing to Trinidad and Tobago citizenry what they expected. Why has that not been happening all these years? I mean, I understand what you just said about the 700 meg. I understand you no longer say, "Can you hear me now?" Yes, I can hear you because this signal is now riding as against line of sight. So I understand that. What I am trying to get here is why has it not been as successful, one, and even to the tune of even allowing a just come competitor to almost come on par with them as far as grabbing the audience?
I think it could be summed up in one with leadership. I think there was an absence of focus and visionary leadership at TSTT at a particular time. And then, you know, the last regime appointed a chairman, good person, but absolutely how you put it, a mismatch, a clear mismatch for the role of TSTT. So to us, the company went backwards. And then we had situations where CEOs were coming in, and they weren't interested in moving the company forward. There was one CEO that came in, a guy named, I think it's Mr. Espinal, and he had a vision for TSTT. He started to carry the company in a particular direction. And they never renewed his contract.
There is still the question, Joseph Remy, of productivity. Lots of folks have said productivity was a major reason why TSTT was not getting the job done as far as returns to the taxpayers.
Well, you know, I would like someone to break that down for me and go to the specific areas where they believe that workers were not productive. Nobody can point the finger on that.
But you have heard the argument made many times.
I've been hearing that argument overall in the nation, Rennie. Everybody is saying there's low productivity in the country. But have we done a study to determine what is causing the issues of productivity? Have we done a study on a national scale to ask why it is I must take somebody from South and put them through 3 hours traffic to come to Port of Spain and expect them to be productive? Nobody's looking at that, but they get down to the worker. Are we asking in TSTT's particular case now why it is that a company that earns $3 billion of revenue every year can't have a proper fleet? So in the absence of vehicles, how do they expect the employees to be productive? Employees are protesting now for the absence of adequate vehicles to take them to do maintenance work. And those are the issues that we need to put on the table before we could accuse the workers of not being productive.
Precisely why we ask you here, so we can get these matters out and let the public decide. The Secretary General of the Communication Workers Union, Joseph Remy, just before you go, I do have to go into 2 areas here, and we are talking about the situation at TSTT. Is it your feeling that, because I have sought opinions on this up till late last night, I was doing that. Is it your understanding of the law, of the Constitution, that before Mr. Elias and his board can enter into an agreement like this, they should have the blessings, the approval of the corporation soul? Is it something that they must report to him first, or they can do something, and if there's something amiss, then he will request as necessary? I think you have said, and I'm looking at it here, that the government, the cabinet, should have known about this before.
Definitely. I totally agree with that, Rennie, and I'm saying this on the basis of experience. I sat at one time as the chairman of a board, the chairman of the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, and we are fully aware of the State Enterprise Performance Monitoring Manual, which speaks specifically to the issue of what you're supposed to do in certain circumstances.
But is that manual law?
Well, it is law to some extent, because after a while, custom and practice becomes a certain thing, and then you have to understand that if this is a manual that was developed by the state relative to the issue of how you do certain business, I believe that somewhere along the line, someone's supposed to be able to challenge Mr. Elias's approach by, not one, advising the cabinet, and 2, failing to disclose to a constitutional body, the Public Accounts Enterprise Committee, which has a constitutional remit. That is where the illegality step in. And that is why I'm saying to Mr. Elias, while you may not want to deal with the cabinet, you see the parliament is sacrosanct, and you disrespected the parliament, and that is something I'm very concerned about. Conrad Enel, former minister, Mariano Brown, former minister, said to him, the state monitoring said state enterprises or subsidiaries are required to obtain prior approval of the Minister of Finance for the acquisition of significant assets, new investment in non-government securities, the incurrence of new additional long-term debt, and entering into significant contracts. That is written into a document that everyone is aware of. And Mr. Elias breached that in a very brazen way. And to me, he was not apologetic. This is not a private enterprise. What you're doing is taking public funds and put it into private hands. And I believe there is there's a law that speaks to that. And if you could recall, there was a particular matter with the Invaders Bay issue when they were trying to deny persons the right to have access to information. And there was a lawsuit that was filed, and they eventually had to provide it. So that is why we are saying this starts to look like a similar situation.
Are you not hearing an echo of the Calder Heart situation also?
You were right on board, Rennie. You were right on board. It's starting to come around like if someone or some persons believe that they have unfettered rights to interfere with state resources and no one can challenge them. But my question is, what gives Mr. Elias such confidence to speak in that manner? That is the question we need to ask. What relationship does he have that will give him that kind of confidence to speak about those matters? That is the fundamental question, and somebody needs to get behind his relationship to know. He is talking from a position of power, he believes, and somebody is giving him that power. We need to look at his close associates.
I hear exactly what you're saying. Secretary General of the Communication Workers Union, Joseph Remy, thank you so much for coming in to us this morning. Hitherto, not ask of you, is there any area that you think we need to put any further clarity on this?
Well, before I go, Rennie, let me just say that I want to give a clarion call to all the TSTT workers and let them know that the Communication Workers Union is on top of this issue. We could only be on top of this issue also with the support of all the employees. This is the time now. We have been signaling this long ago that there's going to be a major battle at this company. This is the time now because what we are seeing, this is a brazen attempt to privatize TSTT and for some private interests to take control of the lucrative telecommunication sector. And as such, we should not allow that to happen. We ought not to. Telecom is so important for national security, education, health, and all the other social benefits of a country. We should not allow the entire industry to be placed in private hands.
We will be watching along with you. Mr. Remy, Joseph Remy, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
It was a pleasure.
Have yourself a wonderful day today, as always.
Thanks much, man. All the best.
Thank you so much for the clarity.
Okay.
It is currently 10:36. Earlier, I said after 6. The morning habit is getting to me a bit, and Joseph laughed me off on that. It is 36 minutes after 10 o'clock. We will be joined momentarily by Dr. Bo Tiwari, the former minister, on the question of property tax and what the opposition from the UNC is.